Tracy can sit on while I introduce her.
Yeah. Bruce, just hold a second. This is live, going out to the internet. Just don't speak to the phone.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to you all. Welcome, Cathedral friends, friends of friends, and others, and welcome to those of you who are joining us through the live stream. First time we've actually done this sort of hybrid arrangement. We hope you, watching from your home, enjoy it as much as we're going to here in the nave. As you know, our lecture this evening will touch on the foundation, not just of the Friends 90 years ago, but also the association of the broderers at the same time. All of it, all of us, interlinked, as we'll hear from Tracy. And so I wish to give a special welcome this evening to the immediate past master of the worshipful company of broderers, Toby Gunter and Mrs. Gunter, Annabel Gunter. They just happen to live in the same village as Suzanne and myself. The cathedral is particularly grateful to Toby, who was instrumental in awarding us a grant of £3,000, which will go towards the renovation of kneelers and so on. I don't know quite what the details are yet, but also the provision of a new gown for the head verger. Now, there is the gown. It was commissioned during the coronation year 1953. It's still being worn by the head verger, although, of course, he wasn't the original wearer. We did ask him to do a twirl, but he's actually sitting in there with the pictures that you're seeing on your screens and balancing the sound. So, but I'm sure those people who know the cathedral will know Darren extremely well. It's looking a bit moth-eaten. Darren, sorry about that, but it is looking a bit moth-eaten, and we're delighted to have some money now where we can buy a new one, have a new one made, as part of the platinum anniversary of Her Majesty's accession next year, and she, of course, is our patron. But our main guest, of course, this evening is Tracy Chevalier, best-selling author, as you know, with Girl with a Pearl Earring, and then later the novel, which blends fiction and fact, I think it's right to say, isn't it? A single thread, which is all about this place and us. We're very grateful to you, Tracy, for agreeing to give this lecture to celebrate our 90th anniversary. But before we hand over to you, may I ask our Vice Dean, Rowley Ream, who'd just like quickly to add his own welcome to mine. Rowley.
It's a very great delight to see you in this cathedral building and to see beyond you, as it were, to the Zoom audience. So you're all so welcome to this place. It occurs to me that Tracy and the Friends and the chapter and you all are bound by this common and deep love for this building. So it's an extraordinary privilege to be gathered here this evening. It is slightly surprising to see Darren headless. He doesn't lose his head very often, in my experience. And we look forward to seeing it restored to him very soon in this new robe. Thank you for your support of that. I'd like to start with a prayer before I introduce Tracy to you. Help us, good Lord, to be attentive to the thread of our lives and to the patterns they make with others. May we live with resilience when others prick us, and always with respect, courtesy, and creativity, in the faith that your final designs for us are all good and glorious. We ask this for the sake of Christ our Lord. Amen. So without further ado, I hand over to Tracy Chevalier.
Good evening. I don't think I've ever spoken in a room with such an echo before. Wow. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is a very special night for me. It's the first in-person event I've done in 18 months. And I couldn't have chosen a better venue or a venue closer to my heart. So I'm really delighted to celebrate that with you. Now, what we're really here to celebrate tonight, though, is the 90th anniversary of the founding of the Friends of Winchester Cathedral, which does so much to maintain and make this building work and look beautiful. And it's been doing that for 90 years. In its first year, when it was founded in 1931, it did some rather prosaic things as well as more lofty things. So it put in electric lighting. It replaced the rather ancient heating system, and it dealt with a death watch beetle infestation. Thank you, Tom Watson, for those words of wisdom about the history of the Friends. Now, closely entwined with the Friends of Winchester Cathedral is another esteemed organization, also 90 years old, the Cathedral Broderers. Broderers being an old word for people who embroider. They started around the same time. One supported the other, though I think they supported each other. They even shared offices at 9 the Close. On St. Swithin's Day in 1931, 15th of July, there was a meeting to discuss the formation of the Friends of Winchester Cathedral. And at the same meeting, two women, Louisa Pezel and Sybil Blunt, made a presentation about proposed embroideries for the cathedral choir. Tonight, I'm going to talk about those embroideries, how and why I was inspired to write about them, and what it's like to write about real people, places, and things, and some of the challenges that happen when you're mixing fact and fiction. I'm also going to read what I think is one of the most important passages in A Single Thread, my novel, about those embroideries and about this cathedral. And I'm also going to take questions from you. So if you have any, keep them in mind, and towards the end, I will call on you, and I think somebody is going to be coming with a microphone to help you amplify, and you can add your echo to this room, to the nave. Now, in the late 1920s, Bishop Woods, who is the Bishop of Winchester, he knew one of those two women, the embroidery women, Louisa Pessel. He knew her from Yorkshire, from their days in Yorkshire, and he asked her to design and carry out embroidered cushions and kneelers for the small chapel attached to his residence, Wolsey Palace. Louisa Pessel took up this challenge, and she designed and organized the making of cushions and kneelers by the Wolsey Canvas Embroidery Guild. Now, canvas embroidery, when you think of the word embroidery, I can imagine what you're thinking now is of one of those handkerchiefs that's been ironed really well, and it's for sale in an antique shop. And in the corner, it has someone's initials and very delicate flowers embroidered. That is one kind of embroidery, but there are a lot of other types. And one of them is canvas embroidery. Now, canvas embroidery is when you take a bit of mesh, it's kind of a stiff mesh, and you use quite thick wool thread to do various stitches, and we'll see that in the slides I'm going to show. It's relatively easy to do. Even I did it. I made this. You can come up later and see it. It's a spectacles case. If anyone has read the novel, it's a spectacles case that Violet Speedwell makes for her mother. And I had never embroidered before, and even I was able to do it. So it's possible. Now, Louisa Pessel, as I said, organized and had these cushions and kneelers made out. And these were chairs, a cushion on the chairs of the chapel of Wolsey Palace. So there were cushions, there were bench cushions, and there were kneelers. If you notice on this kneeler, right there, you can see a date and initials. That's something that Louisa Pessel asked her embroiderers to do, is to make a mark and say it was theirs. So if you go back to the presbytery, I don't know if you can go tonight, but another time, and you look at the kneelers, you'll notice that each one has initials and dates. Gordon Selwyn became dean of Winchester Cathedral in 1931, and one of the first things he did was to ask Louisa Pessel if she would make cushions and kneelers for the choir stalls of Winchester Cathedral. He had been to Wolsey Palace, to the chapel, and seen the cushions and kneelers there, and I don't think he realized quite how much work went into them. And he said to Pessel, will you do, I think we need some back there to brighten up things a little bit. Will you organize this? Well, Louisa Pessel knew just how much organization that would take. It was a much, much bigger project than the chapel. And it was going to take more people, more time, and more money. But she said yes. In April of 1931, I saw a letter where she said, yes, I'll organize this, but we're going to need some money from this new Friends of Winchester Cathedral, not to pay for labor. This was all done by volunteers. over 800 people were involved in this project over a period of 6 years, 1931 to 1937. But they needed some money for the materials. And so the newly formed Friends of Winchester Cathedral gave them £100 for the cost of the materials to start with. That went towards making 360 kneelers, 62 stalls cushions, 34 long bench cushions, 96 alms bags, those are little bags you pass along to put donations in, and other bits and bobs. So the Cathedral Broderers was officially founded in October of 1931, and there was an inauguration service here. But Louisa Pezel and Sybil Blunt had clearly been working already because they made a display of the designs they had in mind for the stall cushions. Now, who was Louisa Pezel? Because you're going to hear a lot about her, and I'm going to read about her. Sorry about the quality of the photograph, but it's very old. Louisa was born in Bradford in 1870 to a well-to-do family. She studied at the Royal College of Art in London, and she became an expert in embroidery. She lectured, she published books, and she advised the Victoria and Albert Museum cataloging their embroidery collection. So she would make drawings of the designs and figure out where they were from and how old they were. Some of them were quite involved. She published books. This is about Eastern embroideries, and she also published several volumes of how to do embroidery. She also taught embroidery abroad. She lived abroad, rather unusually for a woman at that time. She taught in Athens from 1903 to 1907. She taught at a girls' school embroidery there. She also traveled. She went to Egypt. She went to India. She never married. She was quite an independent woman. During World War I, when she was back in England, she taught embroidery to convalescing soldiers as therapy. Now, she wrote about this experience, and I'm just going to read to you what she said about the therapeutic quality of stitching. The steady, repetitive work gives the patient a sense of rhythm which is extraordinarily soothing to frayed and tired nerves. For this reason, the work should not be beyond the worker's powers, and it is important to start on something simple. Color plays a very important part in healing. Softer, rich, and gracious colors all have an obvious curative effect. In some cases, on the other hand, a flagrantly startling color will have the effect of shaking a patient out of his lethargy when he was sunk too deep in himself, and this imperceptibly changes his whole mental attitude. That is often the first step towards complete recovery. Apart from this largely unconscious effect that color has on the patient, this sort of work is immensely valuable in providing an outlet for the artist impulse which is latent in so many people. This in itself is an important factor in psychological healing. And when I read that, I was thinking about how over the last 18 months, so many of us have taken up needles or painting or making things as a kind of comfort. I quilt, and in April 2020, I thought I've got to stop listening to the news and sit at night and quilt, and that calmed me right down. So I understand exactly what she's talking about. In 1920, Louisa Pezel became the first president of the Embroiderers Guild. After her parents died, she gravitated south. She ended up first in Twyford and eventually in Winchester. This is what she looked like in the late 20s. By then, she was an expert in her field. She was well-traveled. She was respected, organized, and clearly capable of running an operation involving hundreds of people. Louisa Pessl had a very clear idea of how to teach embroidery. What you do is you teach somebody first, you teach them the stitches. Once they've mastered it, they have to teach someone else. And if you've read A Single Thread, you'll know that the heroine, Violet Speedwell, has to do just that. And it's very clever because when you learn something, if you then have to teach it to someone else, it forces you to clarify what you're doing, to answer questions that you may not be certain about, and it deepens your understanding of what you do. She was also very strict about quality. She said, these cushions and kneelers are going to last in this cathedral for hundreds of years, perhaps, and they must look good. So she made her workers unpick their work often until she was satisfied with their quality. Now, as I mentioned, canvas embroidery is relatively simple to do and achieve good effects without too much effort. But there is also a harder element of it. Most canvas embroidery was using larger wool and thread, but there's also a technique called petit point, and it's using thinner thread and smaller stitches. So some of the women, and it was mostly women who did this embroidery, who were better at it, did some of the harder stuff. And we're gonna see a combination of those two together. Now, Penelope Lively, the novelist, came across Louisa Pessl, and she mentioned her in her memoir called A House Unlocked. And I'm just gonna read the paragraph because when I came across it, I thought, oh yes, this is exactly what she's like. She ran a tight ship, I would imagine. No messing, no flights of individual fancy, and limited tea breaks only. I warm to Miss Pessl. She seems a Gertrude Jekyll-like figure, one of those steely, industrious, inspired early 20th century women who beaver away and revolutionize an entire activity. Gertrude Jekyll affected the gardening habits of 2 generations. For the initiated, Miss Pessl's enlightened skill meant that church kneelers could never be quite the same again. And indeed, I have, ever since I've been turned on to kneelers, I have seen wonderful examples of them in churches all over England. The enterprise was a resounding success, so much that other cathedrals, including probably most notably Wells Cathedral, wanted to do the same thing, and they made their own striking cushions and kneelers for their own choir stalls. Louisa Pessl even had a card made up because so many people asked her about how to set up this military-like operation, and it says, Miss Pessl, Mistress of Embroidery, Winchester Cathedral, is prepared to give advice to workers wishing to organize schemes of work on the lines that are of that done at Winchester. And then she lists prices because this is a skill and she's going to make a little money off of it. I don't think she made any money off of what she did here, but I thought that was really enterprising of her. Now, Louisa Pessl and Sybil Blunt designed together the cushions and kneelers. Sybil Blunt, the historic medallions, there are 56 of them on the long bench cushions, and Louisa Pessl, the surrounds. There was some overlap. It's not always clear who did what, but they were done, particularly the surrounds were of geometric patterns, bright colors. There's a mustard yellow that Louisa said people complained about, but it brought a lightness and a brightness to what can be a very dark choir stalls. And she based her designs on old medieval patterns with a little bit, I think, of Greek thrown in from her time in Greece. Now, this is what they would start out with, a design. They draw it on graph paper and then make models for the workers to follow. The kneelers were made by individuals, and those are the ones that have the initials and the date. The central medallion were of various patterns, but they have echoes of the bosses overhead. Or you can look up. You don't even have to look at this slide. You can look up at that. Those are called knots, medieval knot. The blue surround, Pestle required that there be 3 different blues in the surround of the central knot. That was to give some texture. If you only have one color blue, it makes it a little bit flat. But this, as you can see, it's modeled and it's much more interesting. This one even has a little bit of yellow in it. It goes so far. I particularly love this one with the acorns in the center with sort of checkered caps. And anyone who's read the book, this is Violet's kneeler that she makes, because it's the one that I like the most. So they're very clever designs, and they go very well together. They look good. The problem is the way they put them on chairs now. I think that a lot of people don't kneel much anymore. And I think a lot of people think that they're cushions. They're actually kneelers, but that's okay. You can sit on them. You're allowed. Now, the cushions were more complicated. Here's an overview of the choir. And there were 2 types of cushions. There were 62 stall seats. Oh, sorry, here, let me go back. Okay, the stalls are lining the backs like that, and they're slightly smaller cushions. And then you have the long bench cushions, which is where the choir often sits. And the long bench cushions, the blue bit, they have these medallions on them that are historical. They're historical scenes or people that are related and connected somehow with Winchester. So we're going to have a closer look at them. Getting a little closer, there's that mustard yellow. This is the medallion for Henry VIII. A year after A Single Thread was published, long after the research was done, I met with Lucy Hutchin and Bruce Parker from the Friends of Winchester Cathedral, and they showed me an archive about these medallions that I hadn't seen before, including original designs made by Sybil Blunt of these historic medallions. I find them fascinating, so I'm going to show you a few and the works. So that was what it was designed, just going back. See, it did copy pretty well. And then there are a whole bunch of others. This is the King Arthur cushion, quite an important cushion in the book, and also important later on in my talk. And that's how it, and I loved actually seeing the design, because I realized on the left it was actually meant to be a castle. It doesn't translate quite so well. It looks like a rock on the cushion itself. And then you have Queen Emma, who is, I believe, Ethelred's wife, Canute's wife as well. And what I love about this is it says, the fair maid, the old lady. On the cushion, it's very hard to read that. So now I feel like it's really opened it up to me. This one is of the very famous incident or time in this cathedral from 1905 to 1912, the diver William Walker, who shored up almost single-handedly the foundations of this cathedral. This is commemorating him, and that's the cushion. This is of St. Swithin's, the pilgrimage to the chantry of St. Swithin, which no longer exists, but I think that's what it did look like. I think that's right, and that's the cushion. St. Giles's Fair is a very famous fair, is held just outside of Winchester. And that's what it turns out in Cushion. Absolutely glorious. This is a map of Winchester in the 1930s. If you look in the lower right, you can see a train coming into the station. And if you look up at the top, you can see a train going out of the station. There used to be another line, the other side of Winchester. And the cathedral here is right in the center. You can see Wolsey Palace. You can see the West Gate. And here it is on a cushion. Quite lovely. This was a cushion that commemorates all of the workers of the cathedral. And you start seeing in the upper left-hand corner, in pencil, it says names out. And if you look down below in the margin underneath painter, you can see a saw has been drawn. You can see an axe has been drawn. It's like little doodles done until they get and this is what it turns out on the cushion. And indeed, there's editing going on here because it says names out. So they took out, when they actually made it, they took out the words. This is a cushion that never got made. And I've always been surprised that Jane Austen doesn't have a cushion in this cathedral. Of course, I would think that because I'm a writer. But I was fascinated by this cushion because Florence Nightingale is not really a Winchester gal. I mean, she's from Embley Park, which is, west of here. And Charlotte M. Young is. But I thought, this is the women's cushion. And yet it didn't get made. Not only that, in the lower right-hand corner, it says, take out FN, Florence Nightingale, and put in C.H. Kingsley, Charles Kingsley, who was a writer who had some connection to Winchester, but not that much. And I thought, interesting, somebody was saying, don't make it a women's cushion, make it a writer's cushion. And they also said on the right, leave out the M from Charlotte M. Young, which is not what she was always known as Charlotte M. Young. So I think this cushion should be made myself. And I think that's something I'm going to plant in the idea, in the minds of the cathedral broderers now, that maybe, just maybe, we could make Jane Austen, Florence Nightingale, and Charlotte Young this cushion. Just a thought. Now, I didn't know about any of this a few years ago. I knew nothing about cushions and kneelers and Louisa Pezel or any of that. I wanted to write a cathedral novel. That's what I'm doing here. I always loved cathedrals. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and where there is a national cathedral, which is kind of neo-Gothic. It was actually being built when I was growing up, although it was also in use. There's probably still finishing bits and pieces of it. And I've always, when I moved to England, I used to visit cathedrals. I always get drawn to them, whatever city I'm in. And I thought, a few years ago, I thought, I would like to write a cathedral novel. Which cathedral shall I choose? I could choose Ely, or Wells, or Lincoln, or York Minster. There's so many. Canterbury. Oh, there are many tales to tell. But Winchester Cathedral has two stories that I was immediately attracted to. And I came down here, I'd visited before, but I came down to look specifically to see if I wanted to write one of the two stories. One of them was about William Walker the Diver, because I thought that would be a really dramatic novel. The other was the very famous story of Oliver Cromwell's soldiers, who in 1642 took over, during the Civil War, took over this cathedral and made it into stables. The story is that they took the mortuary chests, opened them up, took the bones of kings and queens and threw them through the great west window there. And the people from the cathedral gathered up the glass and hid it until the restoration of Charles II in 1660, when they restored the Great West Window, but as you probably know, and you look at it, it's not restored. It was Lives of the Saints, but now it's been restored. It was restored higgledy-piggledy to remind us of the fragility of this building, of our faith. And I thought, there's a novel, wow. So I came down here thinking that was what I was probably gonna write about, the great English Civil War novel by an American. And then I walked around, I looked at the window, I saw the statue of William Walker, and then I came across a little display in the library, and I saw this. This is an alms bag. You take it by the little handle and you pass it along and you put your donation in, and then it goes up and down the rows. And there was a display saying, in the 1930s, a group of volunteer women made these alms bags along with cushions and kneelers in the choir stalls. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll just have a little look around. And something about them really appealed to me. And I guess I never go for the obvious, because I set aside Oliver Cromwell and William Walker, and I went for the cushions and kneelers organized by Louisa Pessel and Sybil Blunt. I didn't really know why at the time I made that decision, but now it seems so obvious to me, setting aside the men, William Walker, Oliver Cromwell, setting aside all of the men who built this cathedral, who made the stained glass, who carved the stone, who carved the sculptures. I went for the one thing that we know was made by women, the cushions and kneelers. That was and originally I thought, okay, I'm gonna write about, I was fascinated by Louisa Pessel and Sybil Blunt, knew nothing about them. I thought I'd write about them. And it was gonna be a gentle satire on the petty politics of volunteer groups. A little bit like a Barbara Pym novel. But I didn't do that in the end. Why? Why didn't I? Well, for one reason. This woman. This woman standing with me is named Anne Cleverly, and she got in touch with me in early 2020 because there was at 2 Temple Place in London, there was an exhibition called Unbound, Visionary Women Collecting Textiles. And Louisa Pessel was one of the women featured in that exhibition. Anne Cleverly got in touch with me and said, I am Louisa Pessel's great niece, and I would like to meet you because I'm so happy that Louisa Pessel has been featured in your novel. And I said, so I did meet her at the exhibition. I gave a talk there and she came down from Yorkshire. And I said to her, you know, the reason Louisa Pessel is not the heroine of this novel is because of you. I didn't want to offend you. Louisa Pessel didn't have children, but her sisters did. And I thought, out there somewhere are descendants who are still alive, and they're not going to be too happy if their great aunt or whoever is depicted doing things that wouldn't make sense. Because when I create a heroine, I needed her to do a lot of things, some of them not so great. So I thought I better make up the heroine. So I satisfied, but let Louisa Pessel be in the book, but have a small but very important role as the moral compass of the book. And luckily, Anne Cleverly was very happy with that. So that was good. So I made up my heroine, Violet Speedwell, gave me more freedom. A Single Thread is about a 38-year-old woman who's lost her fiancé in World War I and her brother, and recently loses her father. She's living with her mother in Southampton. It's the early 30s, and her mother's driving her crazy, and she finally decides at the ripe old age of 38 to break away and leave home. Now, this may not seem like a big radical step to us now, but it certainly was for unmarried women at that time. Unmarried women were looked down upon because it was expected that women would marry. And they were called surplus women by newspapers. There was a census taken in 1921 after World War I, and it was discovered there were almost 2 million more women than men. And the newspapers dubbed them surplus women, and that this was a problem. And I thought, I want to write a novel about a surplus woman who actually finds an independent life. And how is she going to do that? She's going to do it through embroidery. And she comes through Winchester, and she ends up becoming one of those women who embroiders. Now, one of the challenges of writing historical fiction, turning fact into fiction, is that sometimes the facts don't fit conveniently into what you want to do. And it's left to the author to figure out, do I ignore it? How do I interpret it? I'm going to give you a very specific example of that now. I realize this is quite a spoiler for the novel, but I have a feeling a lot of you have read it, so I don't think you'll mind too much. When I started doing research for the novel, I came here, I looked around, talked to people, took a lot of pictures. Then I went up to University of Leeds, where Louisa Pessl left the archive of her material. And I started doing research and looking through all these boxes of papers and notebooks and drawings and models that she made of embroidery, including models for the cushions and kneelers at Winchester. I was looking through all these, and then I came across one, and I went, oh, wow. I thought, did Louisa Pessl have fascist tendencies? Why would she have a swastika here? And everything I had read about her didn't indicate that at all. So I was horrified. And then I thought, well, was she just ignorant? Does she not read the news? I don't know. And then I thought, oh no, am I gonna have to write a political novel? I don't do politics with a capital P. I do personal politics with small p's. So I went back to Winchester Cathedral. I thought maybe she didn't use that. Maybe she came to her senses. And I came back and I looked through all the cushions and I found this. That's the King Arthur cushion. And then I found this, the Tree of Life cushion. And then I found that, the Woodlake cushion. And if you just haven't managed to spot them, here's a nice close-up. They're all along the edge. So I thought, oh no, okay, right, she did use them. Now what do I do? And I thought, do I ignore it? Do I just pretend I didn't see it? Does it matter? But it was nagging at me. So several weeks later, I came on another turn to Winchester, and I took a tour. Every time I came here, there might be tour guides out here, and maybe the tour guide who helped me is out there, for which thank you. I was on a tour, we were walking around, and just at the end, we were walking down there on our way out, and the tour guide sort of threw out her arm, and she said, oh, go have a look in Bishop Eddington's chantry. Just have a little look in there. So there's a tomb of the Bishop Eddington. And so we looked and saw that. And just in case you needed a little blown up, that's what I saw. And I went, oh, she copied. And this is a statue that's hundreds of years old. So that's what the copy is. And if you notice, of course, between the swastikas are 4-petaled flowers, which is what you see on there. I think she saw it and she went, that's a really nice border. I'm going to use that. She likes to make little connections with what's already there. I did wonder a little bit whether using a symbol that even by the 1930s was problematic. I mean, the Nazi Party had been using the swastika since 1920. And I had to come up with a possible reasoning. How did she, and because she didn't write anything about it, I kind of had to make it up from what I knew about her. And that's what I'm going to read now. I'm going to read a scene about 10 minutes long. This is quite late in the book. Violet has been away. She's also met a bell ringer named Arthur Knight, who's another moral compass in the book. And she hasn't seen him in a while either. And she comes nipping over to the cathedral after she's been away. And this is what happens. After the broderers' meeting, Violet went to the cathedral to see the cushions, hurrying up the central aisle and mounting the stairs that led to the choir. She was not entirely surprised to see that Arthur was sitting in one of the choir stalls, an embroidered cushion on his lap. She was a bit disappointed that he had already seen the cushions. She had wanted to present them to him with a flourish, in particular the one he was holding, the King Arthur cushion. Arthur set it to one side and stood up as she approached. "Violet, I'm so glad you're here," she said. She held out her hand because she wanted to feel his touch, and he took it and shook it as if they were being formally introduced. He was clearly pleased to see her, but there was something else there, too. He was upset. Had she done something? "So you've seen the cushions, then?" Arthur nodded. "I have." His jaw tightened. It's the cushions that are the problem, Violet thought. She couldn't see why. They were very striking, and even though so far there was only a scattering of them in the choir stall seats, they lit up and lifted the dark wood. Beautifully and unusually designed, carefully made without a stitch out of place. She couldn't guess how they could upset anyone. She picked up the Arthur cushion and ran a hand over it. The design is very fine, isn't it? Sybil Blunt has designed all of the history medallions. Dorothy Jordan stitched the petit point. The landscape of rocks and trees behind the sword and shield is very skillfully shaded, don't you think? And Miss Pezel designed the surround, which is a combination of larger canvas stitches mixed with petit point to give it a varied texture. And who designed and stitched the long border? Arthur turned the cushion so that they were looking at the inch-wide band along the sides that gave the cushion its depth. Violet smiled. He had picked out the surprise she had been saving. Miss Pezel designed it, and, well, it was me. I stitched that border. She was thrilled to have made even a small part of the cushion that bore his name. "You stitched it." Arthur's tight expression made Violet freeze. Something was wrong that she was not taking in. She looked closely at the border for uneven or dropped stitches, for the wrong colors used, or an unpleasing aspect of the design. The border was made up of small blue squares outlined in yellow. In alternating squares were 4-petal flowers shaded in red and pink with a yellow center. The other squares were of 4 yellow lines cricked at right angles, looking a bit like spiders. "Do you never question her designs?" Arthur asked. "No. She gives us quite a bit of freedom when it comes to choosing colors, but she's very clear on the designs." So you did not question her decision to include swastikas in the design? Violet stared at him. Arthur's mustache was twitching, a tiny tick of stress. Then she looked at the border and her face grew hot. Of course the yellow lines made up swastikas. She had recognized them as such when she began stitching the border, but it had not occurred to her to define them in terms other than as a design by Louisa Pezel for a cushioned border, an assignment Violet accepted without question. The swastikas were not turned on their points and depicted in stark black on white and red background, as the Nazis had designed them. They were in benign, fuzzy yellow wool, stitched in long-arm cross, surrounded by blue interspersed with flowers. There was nothing threatening or political about them, but seen through Arthur's eyes, she understood what a jolt they were. He was watching her. She could sense him registering every expression that crossed her face, looking for the answer that would appease him. Violet did not know what that answer was. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't think about them that way when I was making the border. She tried to make light of it. I thought of them as little yellow running men. Little yellow running men, Arthur repeated, and hearing it back, Violet knew it had been the wrong thing to say. She tried to repair the damage. They were just part of the pattern, part of the bigger picture. I didn't associate them with the Nazis. No, you didn't. I'm afraid I have to go and see one of the vergers now. Will you excuse me? He nodded at Violet, then turned and left by the north aisle archway. Violet managed to hold out until he was safely out of earshot before she began to cry. That was how Louisa Pezel found her, sobbing as she dug in her bag for a handkerchief. "My dear, what is it?" her teacher murmured, dropping into the seat next to her. "What has happened?" "Oh, nothing. It's the King Arthur cushion." "Yes?" "I showed it to someone, and he asked me about the swastikas, and I didn't know what to say." "Ah," Louisa Pezel looked around. "Is your friend still here?" "He went to see the vergers about something. That's what he said, at least. Maybe he's gone." "And what is his name?" "Arthur Knight." "All right." Miss Pezel patted her hand. "You wait here. I'll be back directly." She stood and stepped out to the north transept, her court shoes clicking crisply. Violet found the sound comforting. Louisa Pezel was definite and would have an answer, unlike her own muddled thinking. Soon she was back, Arthur trailing behind her, a dubious look on his face. "It turns out Mr. Knight and I have met before," Miss Pezel announced. "I thought I recognized his name. We were both at the St. Swithin service last year, he representing the bell ringers and I the broderers. Now, Miss Speedwell tells me you have a question about the design of the King Arthur cushion. Is that right?" "I do," he said. "I wonder why you've chosen to include swastikas in the border, given their association with the Nazi Party." "Ah, that is an understandable concern, but it is inaccurate. They're not swastikas, they're file thoughts." "File thoughts?" "Yes, it's an old Anglo-Saxon word. It's an ancient symbol that has been used for thousands of years in many cultures and religions, from India to Scandinavia, and particularly used in Hinduism and Buddhism, a symbol of light and life and good fortune. Where do you think the Nazi Party took it from? They did not make it up themselves." "The ancient symbol runs anti-clockwise, whereas the Nazi emblem has it running clockwise," Arthur retorted. "Like the symbols on this cushion." He picked it up and held it out to her. "The direction the symbol runs in is neither here nor there. It has been used both ways for centuries. I will show you." She turned and, to Violet's surprise, stepped out through the southern archway towards the south transept and the nave. "Bring the cushion," she called over her shoulder. She led them along the south aisle, past the transept, and stopped in front of the chantry of Bishop Eddington, one of 7 chantries built for the cathedral's most powerful and influential bishops. There, look inside Eddington's tomb, she commanded. Apart from it being some of the finest medieval sculpture you'll find anywhere, what do you see? Violet and Arthur peeked through adjacent windows. A full-length alabaster statue of Bishop Eddington lay on the tomb, wearing his vestments and crown, his head on a stone pillow, hands folded on his chest. Violet started in astonishment. She had looked at this chantry and statue before, but somehow had not managed to notice the prominent row of swastikas decorating the bishop's stole. And interspersed between the swastikas were 4-petal flowers exactly like those she had embroidered on the cushion border. Miss Pezel had copied exactly that pattern on the border. Violet wanted to laugh aloud, and that was what Arthur did. Sound of surprise, of bemusement, of concession. Those are file thoughts, Louisa Pezel declared. 14th century swastikas, if you like. That is truly remarkable, Arthur said. I've been coming to this cathedral for 40 years and have looked at this tomb dozens of times and never noticed them. And I thought I was an observant man. In my designs for cushions, cathedral cushions and kneelers, I've referred to many patterns and symbols, Miss Pezel said. I do like to tie in designs to those already existing in the cathedral. Arthur held up the cushion so they could compare the border with the statue. Oh, the sculptor was a clever chap. The 4 petals of the flowers echo the 4 arms of the file thought, but provide a still punctuation between the symbol's movement. That is what is very clever about the file thought. It looks as if it's moving, so the design is not static. I couldn't resist using it. Arthur lowered the cushion. I am curious, though. Surely you were aware when you designed them of the growing controversial nature of the swastika as a symbol. One could easily make the mistake of assuming that the designer or the maker, he nodded at Violet, supported the Nazi Party. Louisa Pezel drew herself up. That would indeed be an unfortunate supposition. But I am taking the long view, the very long view. Working in a 900-year-old cathedral does that to you. This symbol is thousands of years old. It will long outlive a party of fascists. I felt no need to pander to them by not using a good design when I saw it. If I did that, they would have won, wouldn't they? Instead, I'm reclaiming it for its true meaning. It is not the Nazi Party that gets to decide for me what interpretation to place on the file thought. I call upon the long history of the symbol. That is what is important to me. I hope that once people see the file thoughts, they will think of them every time they sit in the choir stalls and connect them to the cathedral and Bishop Eddington rather than to German fascists. The Eddington sculptor used the symbol in all innocence. I have used it as an act of subversion. A single thread can make quite a difference. Arthur cocked his head to one side. I don't know if you're brave or foolish, Miss Pezel. Louisa Pezel laughed. Possibly a bit of both. Now, finally, one last thing, and then I'm going to take questions. When I went to see the designs that the Friends of Winchester Cathedral held of the historic medallions, we were looking through them, and I saw this one, which is celebrating Bishop Eddington, and then I spotted something. You probably can't read it, so I'm going to zoom right in. It says, file thought, not swastika. And I was so delighted to see that, because sometimes it's only after you've written it and it's been published that you have confirmation that you were on the right track. So I was on the right track with Louisa Pezel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Now, thank you. I realize I've gone on quite a while. I'm sorry about that. But if you have any questions, I believe this man has the microphone. If you want to put your hand up, I'll call on you and he'll come. Oh, we've got one right in the front. She's starting us off right away. Thank you.
No. There we go. Thank you so much. That was absolutely riveting. And I've been reading your books for years, and it's so exciting to hear what prompts the muse to sort of take over. And I was wondering if that was a familiar process to you for some of your other books, like the very famous Girl with the Pearl Earring and the Lady in the Unicorn and those sorts of things. And perhaps you could say a little bit more about what might be next.
Yes. The question is about how I get inspired and whether it's always the same kind of inspiration, and also what am I working on next. It is similar. The process is similar. Over time, I've changed a bit because I've learned how to do it, and so I can take more shortcuts, or I understand how to be more efficient with the research. But really, what happens is that I'm struck by something. So I'm struck by a Vermeer painting one day, just looking at it, or I go into a dinosaur museum in Dorchester and I read about a fossil hunter named Mary Anning who got struck by lightning as a baby and survived, and I think, I want to write about her. Got to do it. And I knew I wanted to write a cathedral novel, but I came in here thinking it was going to be about something else, and then I was just struck all in one go by the cushions and kneelers. And that's the beauty of it, is that I just have this instinctive feel that I know it's what I want to do. And then after that, the research process is similar. I mean, it always changes a little bit. I was out on the beaches of Lyme Regis looking for fossils, whereas here I was stitching things and looking around and going up into the bell chamber. If you were in town today and you heard the bells ringing weirdly, that was us. We were doing something up there. And so there's always something to learn in a slightly different way, but the process of it is very similar. And having said that, the new book I'm working on is about Venetian glass. And unusually, I had the idea. Readers often give me ideas, and I've had dozens of ideas thrown at me. You must write about this painting or this person. And they never stick, because that's just not how I work. But about 10 years ago, after I did a reading, someone came up to me, an Italian man, it was in Milan, came up to me and he said, "You should write about Venetian glass trade beads. They were used for trade all over the world, and there are really interesting stories about them. Here are a couple of books on them." And I thought, oh, okay. But I looked at the books that night, and I thought, that's kind of interesting, actually. I set it aside, put them in the bookshelf, and then 10 years later, here I am doing it. And so, you know, if you have ideas, I'm never going to say, don't give me an idea, because I might use it. And I mean, it does help that they were made in Venice, so I have to go to Venice a lot, which is, you know, it's a great hardship, but somebody's got to do it. So that is, again, with that, the process, I'm throwing myself into glass making, how it's done, watching them blowing glass, making goblets, making chandeliers, making beads. I've made beads myself. It's that whole, I feel like a well that fills up with ideas and then they spill out onto the page. Any other questions? No, I think that we're probably past our time, so just as well. It's a good way to end is on the future. Thank you. Yes, Bruce.
Well, Tracy, I just want to say, I mean, that was riveting, exciting, actually. I cannot think of a lecture which would have been more appropriate to celebrate our 90th anniversary. It was absolutely staggeringly good. You've done us proud. Thank you so much.
Thank you for everything that you do for this wonderful.
I better just Just some housekeeping, finally. Tracy's going to sign some books here. I think Wells, dear Wells, lovely bookshop in College Street, always support us. Are selling books. If you have books which you've already bought, bring those up and Tracy will sign them. She's got to get back to the Wickham Arms to eat by 8:30.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, okay, fine, we're okay. The other thing is, anybody here who isn't a friend who'd like to become one, we'd love it if you do. And I think that's it. Thank you, all of you, and good night.
Thank you.